I spoke here about 2 years ago when I was running for US Congress. And after I spoke, someone came up to me and told me that what they really liked about what I had to say was that I said virtually, excuse me, that I said nothing about myself, but only talked about my policies. And I want to continue in that vein, because we are at the midnight hour. We are on the brink of what could be a political disaster that may end up robbing us of what's left of our democratic freedom and civil rights. And this is due to our failure to address a social crisis rooted in our failure to fulfill the social rights that we need to have fulfilled in order to take care of our families, be free and equal in society, and participate equally as self-governing citizens. Now, I think we have to recognize that the two elections that are of the most crucial significance for us in Georgia in 2020 are the presidential election and the Senate races. Because in both of these races, first of all, they are the most competitive, since we face no gerrymandering as candidates, and the numbers of potential Democrats and potential Republicans is very close. This is a race in which no one's vote will be wasted. These are races in which no one can afford to stand on the sidelines. The presidency, of course, will be crucial for the direction our country is heading, but the Senate races will be equally decisive, because they will determine who has control over the Senate and what a president is going to be able to do. This is no time to simply be a cheerleader for anything blue that comes your way. We need to not allow political cowardice to rule the day, because I think we in Georgia know, as well as anyone in the country, that although Republicans have been friendly to the destruction of democracy in favor of oligarchy and have been complicit with the rise of an anti-democratic nationalist movement, when Democrats have been in power nationally and on the state level, they have failed to take measures sufficient to overcome entrenched racial and gender disadvantage, to eliminate poverty and overcome the increasing income and wealth inequality in our nation, to halt the continuing erosion of the power of employees, to do anything decisive to really halt the advance of global warming, and also to do anything sufficient to put to rest the threat to our democracy that is also threatening democracies throughout the world, namely the rise of anti-democratic nationalists that take a particular group identity and want to make it the source of all privileges. Now, I am here to bring to Washington the fight to fulfill our social rights and to make America a righteous nation, not just a world power, a great world power, as everyone knows we are. Frankly, because we are a great world power, no other power is in a position to prevent us from becoming righteous. If we do not fulfill all the rights that a human being deserves, it's because of our own greed, our own callousness, and our own political cowardice. Now, the social rights I'm speaking about are not in any way recognized by our Constitution. They are recognized within the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was adopted by the United Nations after the Second World War, thanks to a committee that was led by Eleanor Roosevelt. Now, she, in a sense, was putting on the international table what FDR had himself put before the American public in his last speech to Congress in 1944, where he told us that at this moment, when the Allies were on the verge of defeating fascism and its threat to our democratic freedoms, he told the nation that the freedoms we have are not enough. We need to have a new Bill of Rights so that we can actually pursue happiness in a modern world. And the rights he had in mind were the right to a job at a fair wage, the right to employee empowerment, the right to decent housing, the right to health care, the right to access to education at all levels, the right to legal care in both criminal and civil cases, the right to have access to culture of all sorts. Well, the nation did not listen to this call. Martin Luther King, a quarter century later, made a similar call to the nation. After the successes of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, he knew that that was not enough. As he said, if you don't have a job or income, you have neither life nor liberty nor the opportunity to pursue happiness. And he launched a campaign focused on a social rights agenda that was the poor people's campaign, but it fell on deaf ears, and here we are 50 years later. The most unequal nation in the developed world, with the least social mobility, with racial and gender disadvantage entrenched, firmly entrenched, with employee empowerment at an all-time low, with inequality in wealth and income that has never been seen in this country since the Gilded Age. Now, I'm going to be putting forward in this election a social rights agenda that will be anchored, as in my last congressional race, in a federal job guarantee. And I want to explain today why that is the anchor of all the fulfillments of our social rights and how all of it is capped by what I'm calling legal care for all. Now, the federal job guarantee is what we need in order to wipe out unemployment. And it has attached to it a fair minimum wage. Not a living wage of $15 an hour, which is a prescription for poverty and homelessness, according to the government's own figures, which tell us that in no city in America can anyone afford a one-bedroom apartment, let alone a two-bedroom apartment, if they make $15 an hour. Well, if we have a federal job guarantee, anyone who cannot find a job in the private sector will have one offered by our government in conjunction with local and state authorities to do the kind of things that are not being provided for, but that we need, such as all of the work in refurbishing our failing infrastructure, in making a transition to green energy, in providing mass transportation, public transportation, bringing broadband to everyone, providing all the human services that are lacking, bringing culture, the arts, music to everyone. We saw this done on a mass scale, but as an emergency measure, and not as complete as it should be, nor as free of racial disadvantage in the New Deal programs of the WPA and the CCC. Well, we need to reinvent those and end unemployment. Now, I know many people will say, well, we have only 3% unemployment. And it's generally recognized that that's about the minimum that is possible in a market. But that's still a matter of 5 million people without jobs. 4.5 additional people want to have a full-time job but can only find part-time work. Millions more have stopped looking. And we're not even talking about their dependents. This would be transformative for all those struggling to find work. You can't talk about ending the school-to-prison pipeline without a federal job guarantee. You can't talk about putting the brake on mass incarceration without a federal job guarantee so that everyone knows they have a job awaiting them with a decent living that will provide for their company, their community. There's no way in which we can end the sorry spectacle of veterans coming back jobless, homeless, without a federal job guarantee. But it is also transformative for us, we who have employment, because it lifts the fear of firing. And that fear of firing is something that prevents us from standing up to fight for our rights, to fight against sexual harassment on the job, racial discrimination on the job, our employee rights on the job, etc. And of course, it's good for the economy. It provides maximum buying power because everyone will have an income. And when I say everyone, we have to also add to it replacement income that is equivalent to a fair minimum wage to everyone who is on disability and retirees. And when I talk of a fair wage, I'm talking about at least $20 an hour, which is the minimum you need to be able to live decently. And it also should be adjusted upward as our national productivity increases. So all boats rise. So wages keep pace with the growth of our national wealth. Now, in this way, in one blow, we wipe out unemployment, we wipe out poverty income. And we set the stage in so doing to address all of our problems. We cannot forge ahead to a Green New Deal, which we need to do. We need to make a transition by 2030 to green power and put an end to fossil fuel consumption and production. But to do that, we have to make it possible for anyone whose livelihood depends upon the fossil fuel industry. We have to ensure that they will not be without jobs at fair wages. The federal job guarantee does that. We need to attend to the other part of our health, not just the health of the planet, but our own health. And the most fair and efficient way of doing that is a single-payer healthcare system, which we can call, maybe not Medicare for all, given how poor the benefits are of Medicare, and any of you who are my age know that, but I would call it super Medicare for all. And there are a lot of misconceptions going around that I think have not been properly addressed by our presidential candidates. There are those who want to say that, well, if you have Medicare for all, that means people can't go to the doctors they want to. Well, with a single-payer healthcare system, you can go to any healthcare practitioner, whereas under private insurance plans, you are restricted. Similarly, there's no issue of depriving people of the health plans they're on, because when we institute a single-payer health plan with no copays, no deductibles, no premiums, that covers all physical, mental, dental, and long-term care, who will want to retain their current health plans, which have premiums, copays, deductibles, and restrictions on where they can go and what drugs they can use? But it's important to see that in order to have Medicare for all and realize healthcare is a right, we have to ensure that anyone whose livelihood will be disrupted by the withering away of the private health insurance industry and all those bloated office staffs that have to cope with, this explosion of different health plans, they have to be guaranteed jobs at fair wages, which the federal job guarantee will do. This also applies to comprehensive immigration reform. Because there are people who are concerned that if we give legal status to the 12 million undocumented, that is going to be a threat to their livelihood. That is going to take jobs away from some. That is going to lower wages. Well, we eliminate that fear, a fear that is driving the far-right fascist movements in much of the world, in developed nations that are inundated with refugees and the like, that don't have a federal job guarantee. We remove that fear by ensuring that everyone has a job at a fair wage. And of course, we have to do something else that I think is crucial for the future of the Democratic Party. This election and in other elections, I go speak to union groups. I'm a union member myself. And over again, I find the union officials telling me that their membership is not going to vote for any Democrat. They're sick and tired of the Democratic Party. They consider it a bunch of elitists that has done nothing for labor. Well, the truth is, since the Wagner Act of the 1930s, neither Republicans nor Democrats have done anything sufficient to halt the erosion of unions and employee empowerment that is now at its most extreme, where only 6% of employees in the private sector have any kind of union organization, 10.5% overall, which means that 9 out of 10 workers face a situation where they stand in isolation and their employer can tell them, you're fired, and not require any explanation. I'm pushing an employee bill of rights that has 2 measures that will decisively change the situation and level the playing field between employee and employer. One measure is to require union elections at any enterprise that does not have union organization, and have that be automatic, so that we have unionization as a fundamental human right and have it realized. Secondly, we need to change the structure of corporations and do something that has been done in many countries in Europe. Namely, on corporate boards, we have to ensure that 50% of the seats are held by non-managerial employees elected by their peers. Then CEOs will no longer have these super salaries that are 300 times that of other employees. They will no longer have golden parachutes. They will no longer sell off parts of their companies to benefit shareholders and the like. We will be in a completely different situation. Now, we also have to think about something else, and this is also crucial in regard to how we can deal with such crises as a pandemic, which the coronavirus is threatening to become. Already, we as a nation are more vulnerable to a pandemic than any other developed nation because we do not have health care enforced as a right. We allow millions of us to not be able to get the health care we need, either because we have no health insurance or we have health insurance but can't afford the copays and deductibles and the prices of drugs to be able to get health care. And that leaves us vulnerable. Also, as you know, here and throughout many other counties in this state and country, healthcare facilities are disappearing. And that means we are being left defenseless against the spread of a pandemic. But there's another side of it, and that has to do with the measures we need to take to balance work and family. We are the most backward developed nation when it comes to paid leave. If you don't have paid leave, what happens when, for example, you are coming down with the coronavirus and you need to stay at home? But if you stay at home, you're not going to get any pay in America. And then what happens? You lose your house, your apartment, etc. We need to ensure that everyone has paid medical leave. And in order to ensure that parents can deal with newborn, we have to have 9-month parental leave. We also need to have free public child and elder care. And $900 monthly child allowances, which is what the government says is needed to pay for the extra expenses of having a child. When we do that, we will be able to balance work and family. And that means women in particular will no longer have to make a choice. We all will be able to have the families we want and be able to be active in the economy and in politics. And this then puts us in a position to deal with our housing crisis. Because if everyone has work and decent income, can handle health expenses, then we can prohibit evictions, foreclosures, and utility turnoffs, and have automatic repayment schedules. And then, of course, our public education can succeed. No longer will any children be struggling under the boot of poverty. And we can ensure that there is equal resources for every child by having national funding of our education system so that your zip code doesn't say what kind of schooling your children will get. And by the way, we need to add philosophy to the school curriculum so that we all have experience in thinking about truth and justice. Now, the capstone, and in regard to higher education, we do need to cancel student debt, to free a whole generation of a bondage to an avalanche of costs that prevents them from building families. We also have to have free tuition at public institutions like my own, UGA, together with stipends so people can afford to support themselves. But lastly, I want to add what is the capstone, which I mentioned earlier. Legal care for all. We cannot allow ourselves to depend upon how much money we have to be able to use the law fairly and fight for our rights. But in America, that is the case. The Constitution gives us the right to legal representation for criminal cases, but we all know how that is handled. The resources given to legal aid lawyers, to court-appointed lawyers, are far, far less than those that a private attorney can give a rich client. You cannot have your dream team. And in civil cases, which deal with equally important matters, our family, our work, our housing, sexual harassment, racial discrimination, and so forth, we do not have the right for legal representation. And in 87% of the cases, of civil cases, people go there without legal representation, and 90% of the time, they lose. We need to have a legal care for all situation, where like a Medicare for all, you have your dream team. You go to any lawyer you want. The costs are covered by this public legal insurance program. The rates are negotiated nationally. And in this way, we can all fight for our rights equally. Now, this is a recipe for a new birth of freedom. It all involves tremendous savings. We don't need to spend $1 trillion on dependent welfare programs. We can save $1.7 trillion a year on healthcare costs by bringing them down to what they are in every other part of the world. And Whatever has to be paid for can be paid for fairly. And what do I mean by fair payment? I'm talking about a tax system which taxes only those who can most easily pay the taxes without it having any impact on their opportunities. I'm talking about the 1% and the top 10%. The top 1% has 40% of our national wealth. The top 10% has almost 80% of our national wealth. We can have all the tax burden of federal programs put on the top 10% and 1% with highly graduated income and wealth taxation, and have total, complete tax relief for the bottom 90%. Now, this program, to fulfill our social rights, is one that will make our nation truly righteous. It represents something that could be said to be the fulfillment of the true American dream. It is something that involves programs that have been done in different degrees in this nation and abroad. It is not a utopia. It is something real, something that can be done and can be done as soon as we elect to office those who are committed to it. I am going to be running, hopefully as not a voice in the wilderness. I hope that this program will be something that both you will find exciting, that other candidates will. 2 years ago, I was identified as the first candidate to run on a federal job guarantee. Later, other candidates took it up. Bernie Sanders sometimes speaks about it. I hope that the whole social rights agenda will become something that will be the centerpiece of our political agenda. But that's up to you. I don't have $20 million of my own to put in the race like Kelly Loeffler. I don't have a father like Joe Lieberman who's going to allow me to raise millions of dollars. I don't have the Democratic establishment behind me. I will only get anywhere on the basis of a grassroots campaign. Go to winfieldforsenate.com, WINFIELD, Senate.com. My website has more information on what I stand for. It has a sign-up sheet or a sign-up portal for volunteers. And of course, I do need donations. A lot of small donations will do the job. But I do need some, because the big problem I face and any candidate faces is getting the message out to the public. And you know that we are living in an election cycle that is egregiously corrupted by an inundation of wealth. On the one hand, the wealth of PACs supported by industry and special wealthy interest groups, and then by the private wealth of individuals, such as billionaires Bloomberg and Steyer and others, who are giving themselves disproportionate political clout because of how much money they have. We need to change that. We need to have comprehensive campaign finance reform. And I'll say one thing about my own situation. I am an employee of the state university. I have to go on unpaid leave in order to run for office. And in that situation, I'm in the situation of any employees, and employees make up 95% of us who earn a living in America. If you're an employee, you have 3 strikes against you if you try to run for office. You have to give up your job if it's a serious race, which means you have no income. Secondly, you have to give up all the benefits that are associated with your job. And in most cases, if you lose, your job is not waiting for you. So who can afford to run for office? I'm a tenured professor, so my job will be waiting for me. But we have to think about that as well. There's a small money problem. Well, thank you for your attention, and I hope you will grill me with whatever questions you have.